The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus told his disciples a parable about the necessity for them to pray always without becoming weary. He said, "There was a judge in a certain town who neither feared God nor respected any human being. And a widow in that town used to come to him and say, 'Render a just decision for me against my adversary.' For a long time the judge was unwilling, but eventually he thought, 'Well, it is true that I neither fear God nor respect any human being. Because this widow keeps bothering me, I shall deliver a just decision for her, lest she finally come and hit me.' The Lord said, 'Pay attention to what the dishonest judge says. Will not God then secure the rights of his chosen ones who call out to him day and night? Will he be slow to answer them? I tell you, he will see to it that justice is done for them speedily. But when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth?'" The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I oftentimes wonder about the state of relationships in our country, especially what I call long-distance relationships. Carrie Underwood, the country singer, has just married Mike Fisher. You might say, who cares? Well, of course, Carrie cares, and so does Mike. The interesting part of it is that Carrie lives in Nashville and travels all over the United States singing concerts. Mike plays hockey for the Ottawa Senators. As you know, that's in Canada. So while Michael is in Canada, Carrie's in Nashville, and they're married. Marriage demands a certain amount of intimacy, at least from a celibate's point of view, that's what it's called. And if you're going to have that kind of intimacy and have a relationship, how do you have it at such great distances? And it seems to me that many things in the United States are like that. How many marriages have dissolved because of travel? A husband's travel away from his wife, or a wife's travel away from her husband. How many times are relationships that we have with one another simply disintegrating because we don't take the time to pick up the phone and call somebody or walk down the street and visit them? How many times do relationships go sour because people simply will not say, "I'm sorry"? Well, our relationships with God can also go south very quickly if we do not pray, which is what Jesus is saying to us today. Pray and persevere in your prayer. The widow succeeded with the judge because she wouldn't give up. We need to persevere in our prayer in order to maintain our relationship with God. And another way that we maintain our relationship with God is listening to His Word and listening to what He has to say to us in the Scriptures. And that's basically what St. Paul is saying to us today in his second letter to Timothy. Paul says to us, "Remain faithful in what you have learned and believed, because you know from whom you learned it." Paul is speaking to Timothy, of course, And we have to stop and think to ourselves, well, what is Paul really saying to Timothy? He's telling him not that he doesn't believe. He says you do. You already believe. And I think sitting here today, we would all say, we believe. We wouldn't be sitting here otherwise. So we are all believers. But Paul is also saying to Timothy, you know from whom you learned what you believe. From infancy you have known the sacred scriptures, which are capable of giving you wisdom for salvation. From infancy you have known the scriptures. Now, a common error that we often make is to think to ourselves, aha, see that? From the earliest of times, the scriptures were there for us to know. What we forget is that Paul was a student of the scriptures of the first book. He was a student of the scriptures of what we call the Old Testament, the Hebrew scriptures. Jesus was a student of the Hebrew scriptures. Timothy was a student of the Hebrew scriptures. Why? There were no scriptures the way we know them. Paul's writings, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John's writings, all were put down later on, maybe in the 1st or 2nd century, but not when Timothy was around. And so Paul is telling Timothy that his faith comes from those who taught it to him. And who were those people? Timothy's father was a pagan. Timothy's mother was a Jew. So who taught Timothy about the scriptures? His mother taught him about the scriptures. And Timothy had another teacher. That teacher was Paul. And so Paul is saying, from whomever you learned that scripture, you learned, and in learning you are called to live by that faith. Paul wasn't worried about whether or not Timothy believed. He knew he did. What his concern was is, will Timothy be able to stand up for his faith?